signs that the pandemic just might be the catalyst needed to turn around a declining church. What if the path most churches were on, if not forced into a radical redirection, would have guaranteed their continued marginalization, irrelevance, and decline? What if the pandemic was forcing countless churches to change in ways that would actually allow them to grow in both size and influence? It was true. The pandemic, early on, positively altered the church in at least 5 desperately needed ways. First, churches were forced to move from a weekend-only, crowd-centric approach to a 7-day-a-week incarnational approach. While every church should promote corporate worship, too many churches made that celebration the be-all and end-all of the life of the church. We say that the church isn't bricks and mortar, but rather a community of faith that can be strategically served by bricks and mortar. Yet too many churches were never leaving the building. The church is to be in the community where it resides, attempting to reach out and serve in the name of Jesus. Early on, the pandemic broke us out of our gospel ghettos and holy huddles and into the neighborhoods and streets where we live, particularly as individual Christians. We weren't able to gather as a community of faith, but we were able to walk our neighborhoods and meet people we had never met before. Second, churches were forced online. You would think that the vast majority of churches already would have been online. They weren't. I don't mean they didn't have a website. Most did. I mean they didn't have an online presence. Prior to the pandemic, a relatively small fraction of Protestant churches in the technologically advanced U.S., much less in the wider world, had an online campus or had ever streamed a service on Facebook. But virtually overnight, the vast majority of churches did have an online presence. Churches were finally going where the world actually lived. Third, churches were forced to embrace social media. Before the pandemic, most churches not only did not have an online presence, but also did not embrace or use social media. A study found that pre-pandemic, only 15% of churches in the U.S. were using Twitter or Instagram. Yet, as churches quickly learned, social media is the communication network of the modern world. Increasingly, it's how people relate, get their news, and interact with organizations. The pandemic forced churches to learn to communicate the way the people they were trying to reach were communicating. Fourth, churches were forced to innovate and change. Necessity, it has been said, is the mother of invention. It is also the mother of change. When you are forced to stop doing things the way you have always done them and must find a way to soldier on, you are pushed into new ways of thinking and acting. Some have opined that the 7 last words of a dying church are, "We've never done it that way before." In the nick of time, at least for many churches were having to say, "We must do things like never before." That takes a church from 7 words before death to 7 words before life. Finally, churches were brought back to mission. When all your ways of doing things are stripped away, you are left with something raw and unfiltered, your real reason to exist. When faced with, say, the inability to meet for a Sunday service, you are forced to ask yourself what you were trying to do through that Sunday service, and then go about doing it. Then, just as we had found our footing, just as we were making inroads we'd never made before, at our first opportunity, we went right back to business as usual. Don't get me wrong, there was nothing but joy in once again offering in-person services. But I can't begin to tell you how many pastors and church leaders I heard express that the key to everything being well again was the ability to meet again. They said they hoped they would never hear the phrase Facebook streaming again for the rest of their lives. But then came the shock. People